pretty seasoned sexually. They can teach a young man a lot about the world. And they're not about to get pregnant or rush him to the altar. So there's a lot to recommend. An interlude with an older woman.
Author and journalist Gail Sheehy today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Well, millions of Gen X and baby boom women know something that their mothers didn't know, or at least wouldn't acknowledge. And that is that women in their 40s or 50s or beyond don't lose their sexual appetite. In fact, quite the contrary. Now, back in 1976, Gail Sheehy wrote a powerful book that redefined the stages of life that we all go through. Her book became a huge bestseller. It was called Passages. And it introduced us to the term second adulthood. Now, fast forward 30 years, in 2006, Gail Sheehy writes another book that shows us what a second adulthood looks like, very often, for older women. And her book was called Sex and the Seasoned Woman. Drawing on the same interviewing technique that made her famous, Sheehy found in interviews with women all over the country something that was right in front of us all along, which is that older women still enjoy the same pleasures that they enjoyed when they were in their 20s. Now, there is one word that you're not going to hear in this interview, so don't go listening for it. You will not hear the word cougar in this interview. But in just a moment, my conversation with Gail Sheehy.
Come back with us now as we relive a little piece of our cultural history on Now I've Heard Everything. This interview is from Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2006, Gail Sheehy.
I think men are pretty interested in how to approach or how to live with the seasoned woman because she changes a lot from the young woman they might have married.
So how do you define, for the purposes of this book, this interview, a seasoned woman?
A seasoned woman is spicy. She's been marinated by life experience. And so I liken her to a fine, complex wine. She can be tart or sweet or effervescent or mellow. And she is likely to be rediscovering who she is or who she was when she started out before she became kind of tied down by the roles of her first adulthood. You know, most women spend their first adulthood from 30 to 50 pleasing mates, children, bosses, mentors. And when they get to 50, they start entering the age of mastery. And they really want to master their own emotions and the environment around them and their work or their cause. And they're not really interested in being tied down. And about a third of them in this new generation are divorced or single. So they're open in a whole new way. It's a whole new universe of rather lusty, often liberated women who, after all, gave us the sexual revolution. They're not about to give up all the pleasures of touching and being touched for some hobby, utilizing yarn, as nice as knitting is. They're open to sex and love and dating, using the internet, new dreams. That's really essential. So many women in their late 40s or 50s say, you know, I just had an aha moment. I don't have a new dream or a passion. That's why my subtitle is Pursuing a Passionate Life. Mm-hmm. And then they're also open to spiritual growth and physical rehabilitation, getting to the gym because now they have time. So it's a whole new life that I call second adulthood. And I find that women out there who I've been interviewing all over the country are really open to it. Nobody ever really asked them about this before. Certainly they didn't ask them about sex. Sex and older woman didn't go in the same package. But there's a whole lot more going out there than I never ever would have imagined.
Well, everything that you've just said, how is that substantially different from our parents' or our grandparents' generation?
Almost totally. It was certainly assumed for women of my mother's generation that they kind of faded into the background. They were their sex life was over once they hit menopause. And nobody ever mentioned menopause. It was just, mom's a little freaky these days, or, she's kind of lost it. She was expected to take on the role of grandma or caretaker for whatever family member got sick first or complained the loudest. And women still do that, but they're more likely to understand that you can't devote yourself to caregiving full time for someone else, or you yourself are going to run out of steam. And so even if they do have that obligation, they are likely to be pursuing a cause or a dream, or trying desperately to continue working and keeping themselves engaged.
Now, you surveyed, hundreds or was it thousands of women for this book?
Well, I had about 775 women answer my online questionnaire, and then I interviewed 400 of those, Bill, to kind of get the whole spread. And I asked those who were the most interesting to gather a group of their friends, and I would go and visit them. I bought a car, drove across the country, and had group interviews in places that I normally wouldn't go, like Fort Worth, Texas, where women have to fight a lot of religious prescriptions and the attitude that any woman over 50 who's divorced is a hussy if she's dating. And places like Sheridan, Arkansas, little rural places in the South, Northern California, where San Francisco women are much more free and bold. And I met a dental surgeon there who at 45 decided that after 2 failed marriages that she was ready to really take an adventure. So she learned how to fly, and she was so excited by flying in an open cockpit biplane that she entered an Amelia Earhart contest, flew from California to New York and back, and won, and fell in love with her 25-year-old flight instructor. Which sounds kind of bizarre, and people told her, you'll suffer so much because this can never work. Well, they're still together 5 years later, and they're devoted to their shared passion of buying and repairing antique planes.
You've got many instances in this book of what to many men is an anomaly, which is younger men going for older women. This, among men, it's common knowledge. This just doesn't happen. Young men don't like older women.
Well, it's a new ball game. I think, I've asked a young man about this appeal. One of the great appeals is that older women have a kind of a what the heck closing time joie de vivre. They're spontaneous. They love fun and romance and companionship and adventure. They're pretty seasoned sexually. They can teach a young man a lot about the world. They don't have little toddlers running around underfoot, and they're not about to get pregnant or rush him to the altar or have any rescue fantasies. So there's a lot to recommend an interlude with an older woman.
And it's not always just a short little fling either.
No. As a matter of fact, there's some people in the book who actually got married. One woman who lives down in Central Valley of California, not a very well-traveled place. She was on the internet learning French, and she began corresponding with a young man in Paris who was engaged. And eventually his engagement fell apart. He came to the United States to visit family. They met in person. They were not at all the physical fantasy that one another held, but they shared this passion for French, and they had a wonderful sexual union, chemistry. So they got married and moved into her mother's house.
Well, it strikes me, you mentioned the internet. This has changed things dramatically, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Yeah, women don't have to belly up at a singles bar to meet somebody.
Nor do men, actually.
Nor do men, yeah, which can be pretty demeaning and expensive. So they can just operate a mouse in their own house. And for women in particular, it's very protective because if they like a wink from a man, they can, gradually lead him on until they have a phone conversation, wowee, and then they can have a coffee date, wowee, and, maybe a month or 2 down the line, they actually get together. So she can slow down the whole process, and if she doesn't like the wink she gets, she can just block those callers.
You're describing almost word for word exactly how my second wife and I met.
Really?
we are an online couple who exactly what you just described.
Wow, isn't that wonderful? It's so interesting, Bill. It's a complete reverse of what was going on in the late 60s when people were, jumping into bed together, and maybe the next morning they'd find out what the last name was.
After this short break, Gail Sheehy explains what a pilot light lover is.
Are you enjoying this conversation so far? And would you like to get a copy of the book we're talking about?
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
When you make a purchase through our affiliate links, you're also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2006 conversation with Gail Sheehy.
We've come so far, baby, if you want to phrase it that way,
Right.
that a lot of not just the old inhibitions have gone by the side, but now a lot of the old fears. It strikes me that these women are very realistic
Right.
about the way the world operates in 2006.
Yes, that's right. And for instance, the woman I told you about who's been flying with her and enjoying her doing barrel rolls in the sky, and also somewhat in their shared Airy in the hangar that they built together. She says to him, "Well, I just read today that women are likely to live until 100, so buckle up, sweetie. It's not going to be pretty." And she fully expects that it won't last, but his mother and her sister both think that he's more completely devoted to this even than she is. Isn't that interesting?
Well, again, isn't that a hallmark of the seasoned women that you're talking about? Is that there isn't this sense that they may have had when they were in their 20s that, man, I got to find a guy. We got to get married. We've got to settle down. This is it for the rest of my life.
No.
This is just, and I don't want to reduce it to a fling, but it's more temporary. It
Right.
strikes me than they may have considered it once to be.
Well, the love affair may be temporary, and I talk about the pilot light lover who often comes into a woman's life at this time and starts off the process. I'm describing pursuing a passionate life as a series of phases, beginning with a romantic renaissance. So this pilot light lover may reawaken her sexual fires and give her confidence in her womanliness, and then he may disappear, and there may be a little period of heartbreak, but after all, at this age, you save devastating for cancer. You don't get devastated because romance ends. Then she may go on to form friendships from men that she meets, either online or in other ways. One woman who went back online dating after she had been pretty celibate for over almost 20 years as a single mom working hard. And she was shy about meeting any man because she was overweight. So finally this police officer, like her former husband, pressed her, and she said, "I'm big." And he said, "I like big. My former wife, my deceased wife, was big. Meet me." So they had a wonderful sexual romance, and he dropped her after 6 months. And after she got over it, she realized that the universe had sent her just what she needed, somebody to get her out of the house and get started. She then began dating as she thought the internet was like a candy jar full of millions of men. You could just toss them out if they weren't any good. But here's the really important part of it. Her only son died of a brain aneurysm, which is probably the greatest tragedy a woman can imagine, have an adult child die. The people who showed up for the wake and were there for her afterwards were 6 of the friends that she made among men on the internet. So there's a lot of other things about finding soulmates, life mates, companions by getting out there and not just retreating into the corner and knitting and taking care of the cranky people in your household. But I don't want this to seem as though it's only about sex. That's just sort of to get us into the tent. But just as important is learning how to be alone with your new self. Most women are so habituated to planning and operating the incredibly complex machinery of family life that it's almost impossible for them to just, nourish themselves or take an inventory of themselves. What do they really like? What do they really dislike? How do you become a seasoned woman, well, you cut away everything that isn't a seasoned woman. Make room for this, what can flourish, the dormant parts of yourself that you left behind. So some women, go away alone for one weekend a month, or they go to a spa for a week. And in an extreme case, two women, one of them, Erik Erikson's wife, who he was the father of adult development, she went to Cape Cod for a year while her husband was being lionized, and just wrote a book and, revisited who she was and who she needed to be in the next part of her life. And then after that is the boldness to dream and dream big. Something that's really going to be a passion that will maybe outlast your lifetime. And then seeking soul. Spiritual growth. A period of spiritual growth becomes very important to people, especially in their 60s and 70s, and connecting to larger realm and a larger purpose in life, giving back, developing a communal heart, giving back to the community, being invested in the community. That's one of the hallmarks of longevity. And then finally, the final phase in the arc is graduating to grand love. And that is the pot of gold. That is when you really have forged a soul connection with at least one other person. You probably are enjoying the spontaneity of grandchildren who remind you what it's like to just live in the moment. But it's not only about being the chaste church lady. I actually write also about seasoned sirens. There are much older women who know the true secret of seduction, which is not your looks, but really wit and sass and the ability to tell a good story.
You've got to talk for a moment about your interview with Kitty Carlisle Hart.
Right.
She's 95 years old.
95, and she revived her career as a cabaret singer at 92. Isn't that marvelous? So when I go in, she's lying on the floor with her legs up over her head, doing little exercise. And she plays the piano every day to keep her fingers limber. She sings. She gets all that feedback from the audience, so she knows that she's still appreciated. And she has 3 boyfriends, 1 younger, 2 older. And, she's not anxious to remarry. She never remarried after Moss Hart, but she's had, a wonderfully robust life of friends and companions, and right to this day.
Gail Sheehy died in 2020. She was 83. Now you can get your copy of Sex and the Seasoned Woman by Gail Sheehy by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 2005 interview with New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd.
Evolutionary biologists say the Y chromosome is on notice and might go out of business in 100,000 years. And what would a planet without men look like? And if you went to an all-girls Catholic high school, you know for sure that we can be just as nasty and territorial as guys.
And my 1988 conversation with Kitty Carlisle Hart.
Groucho was the worrier. He would come to me all the time and say, with a deadpan expression, "Is this funny?" and say a joke. And I'd say, "No, Groucho, that's not funny." And he'd go away, hang his head, come back 2 minutes later and say, "Well, is this funny?"
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, he was the famous, renowned head of Notre Dame University for many years. We'll revisit my 1990 conversation with Father Theodore Hesburgh.
You don't say things and then not do them. If you say, this is where we draw the line, people like to know where the line is. I mean, even older people have to say, I can get away with a certain amount of nonsense, but this is the line. I go over this line, I'm in trouble.
That's next time. Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.